Leaders in Washington are trying to bring domestic manufacturing jobs back after a 40-year-long cycle of decline.
American auto companies, along with American labor, are committing their treasure and their talent to make electric vehicles all across America.
There's a lot of great stuff happening here in Michigan, and we are competing.
At its height, nearly 20 million people worked in the manufacturing industry. Today, it's about 13 million. Workers could end up competing for a smaller pool of jobs that require a different set of skills.
The lines that run to drive oil or gas or any of a number of other fluids around an internal combustion engine aren't going to be there, don't have to be there.
Researchers believe that the surging demand for EVs could force businesses to pivot quickly.
We find that this transition is already affecting workforce morale deeply. In some places, it's positive, there's hope for the future, but in many other places, or at the same time with some individuals, there is a lot of concern.
The first thing to know is that electric vehicles and traditional cars are built in slightly different ways.
These jobs just are very different. So internal combustion engines, they have crankshafts, spark plugs, radiators, and the electric vehicle has the battery. So electric vehicles have fewer moving parts and require less equipment. So typically they require less manufacturing to build. The estimates put it at about 30% less.
In general, the body and the chassis, the wheels, the axles, and that kind of thing are probably still going to be very much similar in an EV, in an electric vehicle, as they are in a car today.
Oftentimes, when you work for an internal combustion engine, you're working on spark plugs and you're working on certain mechanics of the car. But when you transition to an electric vehicle, you're looking at batteries, and it's a very different kind of job. So there's a lack of understanding as to whether these jobs will dry up or be transferable if there's workforce training, and what kinds of needs the company will have in the future. And so there's this kind of fear or uncertainty about those that are currently in school and how can they even train themselves to be ready for the next jobs that these factories offer.
Up into the 50s and 60s, benefits and protections for workers was hard to come by. It was because of the UAW and its work with the auto owners that vacations were put into place. Insurance, health insurance, dental insurance, the opportunity to retire with a reasonably good retirement package. All of that came about because of the union working with management. The contract workers have been around for a long time, but there haven't been as many of them until kind of the last 20 or 30 years. If they need a worker on the line, they can find someone to do that work through an agency rather than having to bring that person onto the workforce, which saves them money. And at the same time, though, that worker doesn't get the protections that most union workers would get.
We might actually see entire plants shut down or close or have to transition, whereas the assembly plants, for example, might be able to just transfer from one workforce kind of set of skills to another. The fate of these companies is very intimately tied to the fate of the communities and whether the jobs will be there. But there are other ways that U.S. companies can kind of compensate for this loss of employment. So one is through their supply chains, and the other is through domestic production, increasing domestic production. Over half of the batteries used in the U.S. come from companies that are based in South Korea, Japan, and China. So there's this big opportunity for the U.S. to invest more in the batteries so as to bring them into domestic companies and therefore kind of offset the loss of employment.
The most important question that remains is how soon demand for EVs will materialize.
Unless we can make that change and make it pretty quickly, there are going to be bigger problems to deal with. And so I think we all know we have to do it.
There was an overwhelming sentiment among auto workers that they had earned the right to build the next American car because they had devoted their entire careers, their entire professions, including their knees and their bodies, to building these cars. And this coincides with these feelings of uncertainty that they don't know if they will actually be able to be a part of this new revolution.